Welcome to today's inService podcast series event. My name is John Carroll. I'm the CEO and founder of the Service Council, and I am delighted to be joined by today's guest, Bit Rambusch. Bit is the Senior Vice President of Service and Solution Delivery for North America of Philips Healthcare. Bit is one of our newer appointees to the advisory board, a long line of contributions from Philips Healthcare. For the last decade plus, we've been the beneficiary of being able to have the predecessors of Bit in his current role serve in a similar capacity, but really excited for Bit's contributions, including today's session. A warm welcome, Bit.
Yeah, thanks, John. I appreciate it. And our Philips team really values the partnership and the relationship we have with you guys at the Service Council. It's a tremendous value to us as well, and appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys today.
Outstanding. And today's topic, we're going to dive into a real critical one, I think, this notion of rewiring your service organization, right? If you think about, the height of the pandemic, lots of reactionary digital transformations. And even prior to the pandemic and post-pandemic, digital transformation has been threaded throughout everybody's day-to-day in the service environment, in terms of how do we innovate, how do we automate, how do we get closer to the customer, get closer to the support agents, and how do we bring these two things together? And what has happened with all these digital transformations and digitization efforts is there's been a lot of um, disconnections created, pockets, perhaps even some instances of disparate databases and some issues with respect to the connection between people, process, and technology, right? And so I think it's among the most critical topics as we head into 2024 to really figure out how do we get better around building our people, process, and technology more integrated together. And so rewiring your service organization is today's topic. We do like to make this as interactive as possible. It will be accessible post-event. So if you wish to access it after the fact, by all means, you can get it at our website or on whatever social channel you subscribe to. And for you that are listening on LinkedIn, thank you for joining us. You're also viewing us, so thank you. And we welcome your comments, we welcome your reactions, we welcome your questions. So we'll try to sort of build that into today's discussion. Without further ado, Bit, let's go ahead and strap in, and here we go. So, Bit, I know you. It's been great to get to know you as you've been appointed to the board. But for our listening audience, maybe something about yourself personal and your professional background. That'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, John. And again, thanks for the time. So I've been at Philips for just about 2 years now. I've spent, the majority of my professional career all in the services business and with a variety of companies, NCR, Dell, and now Philips, Johnson Controls as well. But I've done a lot of different services functions, anything from logistics to field engineering, call center work, product management, offer management, quality management of products and services as they get launched. And now, rolling into the Philips side of the house, we've got roughly 3,400 people that are out delivering, project management services, clinical management, and education services to our customers as part of a deployment offering. And then we're supporting those solutions that we deploy with field service engineers, which we like to call now health tech experts. And then obviously, with our logistics and call center teams as well, so, providing a 360-degree coverage of our customers as they go about, trying to provide, healthcare at the highest value we can for our customers as well as the patient.
I love that. Healthcare experts. That's the evolution of the nomenclature you deploy for your frontline. That is outstanding. I've heard a couple of instances of the role of the field service engineer as it becomes more and more critical, right? From field technician to field service engineer. I think it was Ford and their EV strategy deployed a team of angels that are supporting their EV cars that are in market. Superheroes I've even heard at times. I love this healthcare expert concept. I think that's a real cool evolution. We might dive into that at some point throughout the discussion today.
You bet.
So let's talk a little bit more about sort of Philips, if we could. So you talked a little bit about the scale. Tell us a little bit about your role and it's not brand new, but it is a new role for you, and tell us a little bit about the day to day for you personally.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's really about, from a Philips perspective, what we're really focused on is using, innovation and bringing technology to life as it relates to the innovation of healthcare and impacting from a goal perspective, 2 billion lives across the globe. You were mentioning earlier, a lot of what's going on or what has happened and some of the outcomes from the pandemic. And, a lot of people can relate to, the amount of stress that it placed into our healthcare infrastructure and our systems and whatnot.
Yeah.
And, it really has highlighted now on the back end of that, finding workers, getting people to come find this type of employment, has created some challenges for us. And we've had people leaving the business. We have new people coming into the business. But, throughout as we're on the other side of the pandemic, I think we're really starting to find out where a lot of these gaps are that we have probably covered up with either manual activities or just with, the sheer number of people. We just can't afford to do that anymore because we won't be able to provide the healthcare that our customers and our patients certainly need.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, getting into the stage of digital transformation that Philips is at, you just kind of talked a little bit about that, but the referencing back what we were just talking about, how haywire things went with the pandemic and some of the reactionary sort of digital transformation investments that were going on. We've also seen this like heightened information age orientation in terms of the technology investments that are happening, from BI and intelligence to now AI and large language models and even machine intelligence more prominently. Tell us a little bit about Philips, where they are in terms of the digital transformation path. What stage of maturity would you sort of frame your organization currently?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there's probably two phases for us, or two ways to look at it. One is how we do that in terms of the treatment of the diagnosis of treatment for patients, and then how do we use it to improve workflow and whatnot. But if at Philips, we believe that the value of AI is really as strong as the human experience that it supports. So we try to focus on how do we bring the power of AI with deep clinical knowledge that help us create solutions that integrate into the workflows of healthcare providers, as well as people's daily health routines and supporting them at every stage of the health continuum. And then we've got two main sections of our business, and our imaging business and our monitoring business. And so in the imaging side of the house, we use AI extensively to recognize, complex patterns in imaging data, real time, or post procedure. A lot of our focus has been on reducing the image noise, right? And speeding up exams for clinicians as they go through the diagnostics procedures and whatnot, so that we can have more automatic segmentation of, say, heart chambers, or auto calculation of key cardiac functions and parameters during ultrasound exams.
Wow.
And on the monitoring side of our business, I would say we're probably at the early stages, but we do have a distinct advantage in data. We're collecting probably about 22 million data points on a daily basis for a typical hospital. And we've just started really understanding how we harness that data to detect trends, provide decision report support, and really easing the clinician's burden. And again, it goes back to that, we have clinical workers that are in short supply. How are we really starting to empower them and get more proactive and predictive in terms of putting the power of those decisions in their hands versus a lot of the manual activities? The last thing, just then, when you start really thinking about it internally, we know that growing data is growing basically at a pace we've never seen before. We have to really harness that power, in my opinion, and our focus is really around four strategic business outcomes. The first one is, how are we using data to really drive a lean experience, driving waste out of the process, becoming more efficient in terms of how we look at it. And then secondarily, the second area we look at is we call it the employee engagement survey. So what is our NPS of our employees? Like, we want our employees to be raving fans of the tools and the capabilities that they use as well.
Absolutely.
Not to mention, we want the NPS for our customers, but we need the two of those things really functioning together. If we can do those two things really well, it allows us headroom to go do innovation. And the faster we innovate and iterate, we can, maintain a competitive advantage. the challenge for us, honestly, is how do you do that in a complex and regulated business like healthcare? So
Yeah.
we're definitely well on our way. And you had mentioned one of the other things like people, process, and technology. I think one of the things that we probably overlook the most is, the technology is in a lot of cases, I think is kind of viewed as pixie dust, which I have a colleague of mine that kind of coined that phrase. You can't just sprinkle it on and say, turn on AI or go do, artificial intelligence and machine learning or
Yeah.
automate, processes. There has to be a change in the process, and more importantly, it has to be a change in the culture. So how do you bring your teams along really to, kind of grasp that?
Absolutely, man. That I'm fascinated. 22 million data points per day.
Yeah.
That is outstanding. I've got to imagine the challenge in terms of sorting, analyzing, contextualizing, and then disseminating that information in an intelligent way so that your organization can be more capable, right? That takes a lot of components and elements. So
Mhm.
kudos on that. Let's get into the rewiring of the organization from an organizational standpoint, because one
Mhm.
of the things, I just held a webinar where we made our top predictions for 2024. And one of the things I said was that two things: service was going to achieve C-suite status more prominently, more commonly, meaning the recognition of service is going to start to happen more commonly. Its contribution to profit, its importance, etc. But then second to that was that, organizations are kind of, there's a reorg consistency that I'm hearing when I'm talking to members, right?
Yeah.
That they're realigning their people and their functional roadmaps to these technical roadmaps that might have jumped the gun on the organizational structure. So can we talk a little bit about what has happened within Philips from an organizational change management perspective? Has there been changes over the last several years that are noteworthy from your standpoint?
Yeah, and I think we're really, really at the beginning of some of those changes, and in some cases, we're experimenting with capabilities that I think are going to help us drive deeper end-to-end customer intimacy and even intimacy, between our functions.
Yeah.
You mentioned something, when you were asking the question that services is becoming, has more access to the C-suite. It has more, it's becoming a much more important aspect of the profitability of companies and whatnot. And I think historically, I think we've overlooked the services teams and the people that are in the field. And you know, I am blessed with the opportunity to get to work with the people that I do at Philips, and their commitment to healthcare and patient and safety quality and the outcomes in those environments are just second to none.
Yeah.
They give their all every single day, and I think in a lot of cases we have not done our best, and I would say this is from a services industry, not just a Philips perspective, in empowering and enabling these people in the field that are really delivering on behalf of our customers. I think at the end of the day, if you think about what we're doing in these services organizations today, landing the sale is one thing. Then the customer has to enjoy the opportunity to interface or get the business value out of the solution that you actually deliver. And so for us, it's really about um, how are you helping your customers realize what that business value is, and what is your customer getting from that relationship. And so, we talked earlier just about a little bit about data and digital transformation. I think that's why that is really so critical to the future, because services is becoming such a bigger part of that discussion and that relationship. And so we have to not only, customers buy things for a reason. So what is that return on investment? Are they able to achieve their business objectives? Are you
Yeah.
meeting them where they want to be met and making that experience frictionless, seamless, easy? Things that we measure like customer effort score and whatnot. So part of that is now how do we get to the point of breaking some of those silos down and being more end-to-end focused in our work? So we're spending a lot more time, what I would say is around serviceability and getting much more upfront and creating the relationships
Yeah.
with our product teams, our R&D teams, our software teams, certainly our IT teams. We're taking a much more integrated approach around directing what we think the technology strategy is, and I think that's a change for us and Phillips, I think it's probably more of a change from the industry, but we want to make sure that we're eliminating all of these gaps
Yeah.
so that our people can spend more time, doing important things like spending time with customers and solving complex problems versus, individual tasks.
Absolutely. You said a couple things in there that just really resonated with me, and kind of points to something that we've been advocating for a long time, which is there are so many parallels between how we treat and support and enable our customers to how we should treat and support and enable our employees, right? That the 360-degree view, the elimination of friction, the measurement of success and engagement. There's so many parallels between those two constituents,
Oh,
and it's just remarkable as you start to really peel back the onion. So, anyway, so let's get into change management. I want to
mhm,
get into something that was interesting from a recent podcast. I had a gentleman, Jim Bond, who joined us. He's a former Johnson Control guy as well, and he's now a change management specialist, an author, and real smart guy. And he talked about some of the critical, stages or perhaps approaches to change management in this podcast that we titled "Being an Architect" or Becoming an Architect of Change.
mhm,
And there was a couple things he left us with, our listeners. One was involve your A team. Two was be an architect, meaning you're present for both the teardown and the rebuild. And I just thought it was a really important part of it is, the communication and who do you involve, and a lot of critical factors that he brought to light in that discussion. And I thought it was noteworthy because as we looked at some of our research, this comment that uh, around change management and who's involved, 41% of the front line didn't believe they had a role in innovation, and 60% didn't believe that management was listening or enacting their feedback into change management opportunity within the company. So I'm wondering a couple part question here, if we could kind of dive into that one, because I think it's a real critical one. What is your approach to change management? We'll start there. Do you have a particular approach or philosophy? Is it waterfall? Is it agile? Is it something else? And then I've got a couple of questions right behind that as we get into who's involved and what are the steps to change. So
Yeah, I think the first thing you have to really start with is what's in it for me, right?
yeah,
And that's really about, who when you look at who your stakeholders are, what's in it for them, what's the reason for them to make a change. So when you start
yeah,
talking about change, I think that's probably one of the most important questions you have to ask yourself. And as you're communicating that, you want that person obviously to be an advocate, an ally, and part of the team to help you drive that change, whether that's within your organization or within a collaborating organization that you have. So I firmly believe that you can talk to almost anybody around three things, which is cost, revenue, and NPS.
yep,
Obviously, NPS being employee as well as customer.
yep,
And so, if I'm a services person and I'm talking to the product R&D team, I want to have a conversation with them about, they're going to be interested in speeds and feeds and the product features, et cetera. They also want the customers that are using their products to be satisfied. So how can I bring that perspective of why they need to change or how they need to change or how they can make the product better? But in terms and in ways that they can understand it. It's not just from a services point of view. Same thing from an IT perspective. How can I look at the things that we need to get done as we want to transform and do that from an IT point of view? So I think there's an element of how you present it to get people to really, first of all, kind of latch on to the change, uh, and then at that point, uh, I think we really have to focus on we can't have customized approaches for everything. We have the opportunity to simplify our approaches and the outcomes and the creating more seamless experiences. So really kind of working towards what the end goal is in mind, but doing it from a perspective of somebody else's shoes really
right.
starts to help you, I think, getting the engagement that you need to really kind of drive some of that change.
Really great points you make there. Now let's build on that. Let's look
Yeah.
at who's involved in the change. Who are the critical stakeholders that you think are important to a service change management process?
Well, obviously from a services point of view, I want to, I want to make sure that I am, having an eye and an ear down with my frontline employees, whether those are my health tech experts, also field service engineers, right?
Sure.
My project managers, my clinical education specialists. What do they see with the tools and the products and the experiences that they have as they're trying to deliver, on behalf of Philips to our customers?
Mm,
How do we then take those key learnings and start to bring them back into the design process, whether it's a
sure.
marketing team or whether it's a product R&D team, a software team, the IT teams, et cetera, and use that as an opportunity really to kind of create and differentiate from an experience perspective. But I think from my point of view, it's all about creating a closed loop around what we're trying to get to. Our product teams are creating products with a desired outcome. We want to launch those products with the capability to deliver that desired outcome. Are we actually measuring the desired outcome and then using, a continuous improvement? Are we interrogating the outcomes to make sure that we're constantly innovating around them? I go back to the kind of the 4 business points I made earlier. Find out where you're lean, and where there's waste in the process. Look at your employee and your customer, satisfaction scores. The amount of information that you can glean from that to drive innovation and to drive competitive advantage is huge. But I think you have to have your stakeholders at all levels, all functions, and you have to typically kind of break down some of your silos in order to make that happen. The last thing I think that's really critical, and this is one I think we typically see in most companies, if you go and you look at employee engagement surveys and you look at our field teams or teams that are actually delivering things to our customers, our
Mhm.
sales teams, our delivery teams, our project managers, et cetera, the vast majority of them are going to answer a question, say the tools and the capabilities that you put in my hands don't work. So us as leaders, we have to figure out how do we harness that and how do we go back when we are making changes. How are you communicating?
Yeah.
Well, you're driving improvement, but if you don't have a very intentional perspective on how you're communicating what you're doing, how you're ingesting obviously that feedback, and then how you're turning that feedback back around and telling people what you do with them or what you're doing with that feedback, the communication piece of that is so key, because
Absolutely.
ultimately they're at the tip of the spear. uh, you want and need that feedback. So if you're not creating the desire for them to continue to give the feedback, and you're
Yep.
showing them how you're using it to improve their lives and their experiences and their ability to deliver for the customer, you're eventually going to lose them. So that communication loop is so key to go back and really talk about how you're driving and affecting change in the organization.
Lots of great points. And I want to thank our listening audience who has become our participating audience. Thank you for our LinkedIn Live members here. We had a comment here, a couple comments actually, that there was a great example on how companies need to better utilize data. So thank you for sharing that. So thank you to Hassan for that comment. And then Scott Hoffman just commented, end user buy-in is imperative to a project's success. And I think you just captured that quite eloquently. So here on that one. Let's get back to our Q&A here. Let's go into you talk a little bit about supportability and
Mhm.
serviceability. Let's circle back to the concept of establishing a single pane of glass. You talked about the 22 million data points and the importance of data and assimilating and figuring out what's worthy and what's useful. Um, we're hearing a lot more about data democratization. Acquiring, sorting, arranging, building some context around it, and then presenting it and explaining it, and then around all the above, protecting that process. There's a lot of security, heightened security related issues, cybersecurity, and in industries like healthcare and medical, that's obviously very heightened. um, and when we look back at some of the data from our trends, technology categories such as BI and analytics and knowledge management, they've been well defined and growing categories for the last several decades. And all of a sudden, the rise of Gen AI has come into the picture. So, service leaders, why are service leaders so focused on data? You talked a little bit about the importance of data. Um, we look at the field service engineer survey, and we understand why, because the top dislikes in the day to day is paperwork and admin being tracked. There's a little bit of an adversarial relationship between engineers and technology in terms of adoption. And I suspect it's because they're not involved enough so in the digital transformation. Their feedback loop is closed in terms of that continuous improvement. So the technologies we're rolling out, it seems like a new flavor of the month, and it's more of a nuisance than an enabler, right? So there's a little bit of a challenge there. But can you share with our listeners, what are you hearing from your frontline healthcare experts as you now frame them? What in
Yeah, I
terms of
mean,
the importance of data?
yeah, I mean, it's the challenge. You've actually hit the nail on the head from a challenge. There's different systems, there's different capabilities, there's different functions, et cetera. And today, our clinicians struggle with workflow integration because we have multiple devices in that
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah.
There's proprietary communication protocols and oftentimes closed systems, and for a variety of reasons, because of regulations, because of the FDA and HIPAA, security, et cetera. And hospitals, and certainly the people that are using those devices to make decision support, they want to use those devices to their choosing and have them connect together so that they can act on that data more easily.
Absolutely.
And oftentimes those two things are at odds with each other. And so I think where I think the healthcare industry is headed is more of a command and control, where all devices can be managed on open standards and common infrastructure, so that you can service and obviously deliver patient care. That is that's more of an industry challenge. I also think I think we get caught up sometimes from an industry point of view, and I'm just services when you think about data in general.
Sure.
uh, we talk about, hey, let's go do machine learning, let's go do chat GPT and AI, without really understanding what does that really mean. And there have to be some really basic functions in place in order to make those things work. And so I'm sure if many of you have probably used chat and GPT just to play around with it, sometimes you don't actually get the right answer, or you get some pretty crazy answers. You can't
Yeah.
afford to do that in a healthcare setting. So we have to be very careful in terms of how we use it, why we use it, and there's tremendous amounts of ethical and structural ways that we have to think about it.
Sure.
But you really have to think about your data in terms of how is it structured, how is it connected, is it searchable, is it findable, and then I talked earlier about this concept of around a continuous improvement loop.
Yeah.
Your data is going to change. The processes are going to change. How are you looking at that so you're constantly seeing how those things are changing, so that you get headlights and get more proactive or more predictive around changes that are taking place? And I think a lot of times we tend to silo our data functionally, which leads to us optimizing in functional silos. And then when you start to try to get focused on more end-to-end capabilities, those connections are just not there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
there's an area where I think I think companies have done a great job of, executing in a functional silo. Now we have to be much more end-to-end focused. And that's where we're headed, at least at this point right now.
Outstanding.
At the end of the day, there's a gentleman that I have a great relationship with by the name of Seth Early, who's in the information architecture space. He has a great saying: there is no artificial intelligence without information architecture. So if you're not very intentional around your information architecture structure, you won't get to the ability where you can, scale with AI and ML operations as a catalyst for your outcomes.
Totally agree. Couldn't
Yeah,
agree more. You need to have a data strategy before you start to think about AI.
sure.
Correct. Absolutely. Let's can we get into the tactical information and intelligence sources that you're hearing the frontline either requires or requests in terms of being efficient and effective in their day to day? Is it customer history? Is it asset history? Is it manual oriented guidelines? Maybe for our listening audience, if you could just talk a little bit about the hot spots in terms of information they're trying to plug into, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think from an industry point of view, and we see this predominantly at Philips as well, people spend a lot of time searching for information. and because it's not structured in the right way, so it's not searchable or it's not findable, or the information that we do provide them isn't it doesn't necessarily work, or it's not accurate or
Yeah.
relevant. So, we hear that commonly, and through employee engagement surveys, it's the processes don't necessarily work to my advantage. I spend too much time, mending things or doing things in a manual perspective. How do we get to a point where those things are much more automated versus a manual point of view? Um, and again, it kind of goes back to what is your data strategy? How's it connected to your technology strategy and your product strategies, et cetera? And so we're spending much more time now being intentional with putting a serviceability function with workforce innovation, and making sure that our serviceability tenets and guidelines are embedded into the product strategies, embedded into the software strategies, embedded into the IT discussions. And then ultimately, if we can show the business case for why that's important, whether that's around cost out, competitive advantage, or NPS, and things of that nature, it helps us to really start to drive some of those changes. And our people they want to see us make those changes, particularly our folks in the field. And we've got to do a better job of kind of communicating and getting those changes in their hands so that they can deliver those experiences we want them to.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of additional comments and questions from our listening, participating audience. One of which was just a kudos on the importance of SPOG and the single pane of glass, how important it is to the end user, and but the cautionary tale that the actionable data is far more important to understand and deliver in a consumable manner, and that's kind of like what you're talking about. So, cheers on that. We have this other one. Less than 50% of data collected today is used for mining and intelligence gathering and decision making. And secondly, a lot of data is collected for futuristic mining while making current processes complicated. How justifiable and economical is this in terms of collecting all this data and then eventually getting to its use case at some point? In terms of justifying the business case for a data strategy, it sounds like we're trying to get at.
Well, when you think about collecting 22 million points of data a day in a hospital environment, I mean, that's insane.
Yeah,
If you have the right data strategy, and you're very intentional about it, it will help you.
yeah,
Um, I don't. I think this is one of the things that we're going to focus on from a Philips perspective. Is I want our teams to understand a data strategy, or the importance of the data strategy, how to contribute and be a part of the data strategy. We have so much information coming at us that you just can't physically process all of it unless you figure out the automation, the artificial intelligence, the machine learning piece of that, so that it can give you the insights. And it needs to be part of the process. It's not meant as a replacement. It's meant as, how do we augment the workforce to do things in a much more proactive and predictive manner, in a critical inflection points of the customer experience. So yeah, I think we are, in a lot of cases, at the beginning phases of, we want to capture the data, but what do we do with it? And part of that is, now we've got to be very intentional on the training and the development of our people, putting that strategy in place, and then using, trying to find, you can't go boil the ocean with some of the stuff, but how do you find some use cases that can really start to help you, try to drive that better experience, both internally as well as externally.
absolutely. Thank you to our audience. We had another one here just commenting on the great points that you make about data structuring and the use of AI integration into the company. So thank you to Gary for the comments. And then lastly, we had a question I think is a really important one, and it ties back to the critical data and information that the front line needs. And this is around the intersection between logistics and field engineers in terms of technology and information that the engineers need and want, and by what media? I think it's an interesting question. How do you see the intersection of logistics and field engineers in terms of the different types of technology and information that they need and want?
Well, I mean, there are some acronyms I think that are out there. When you think about, well, just go read the manual. I won't use the acronym for, just read the freaking manual, right? I think is one of the terms. Or, there's another one that says too long, didn't read, TDLR, TLDR. People they don't want to read the manual. Hey, it's on page, chapter 7, page 97. Well, I don't have time for that. I don't want to do that. We're in obviously a hyper fast service mode. Take me right to the answer. Take me to the step that I need to. Absolutely. And I think we're getting to the point, and this is, again, I think one of the advantages, if you think about your data strategy and your content structures, how do you make things searchable and findable? If I have 10 steps in the process, go to step 7.
Yeah.
You can be very intentional in terms of how you put the right information at the right place at the right time at that, that customer inflection point to make people, ultimately not have to go read the manual or
absolutely
have to go scale through a bunch of pages and diagrams that they just take me right to the place I need to go.
Absolutely. I love it. Thank you, Scott Allison. Appreciate your commentary and your question. Let's get back to the comment I made earlier in our discussion, which is what often feels like an adversarial relationship between the front line and technology. Because as we look at the data, the frontline and field service engineers that responded to our Voice of the Field Service Engineer survey indicated 81% of the time that they're using the phone a friend technique to become unstuck most commonly. And that's 81% of the time. And we did a little bit of analysis in terms of what is the cost breakdown as a result of that dependency. And we said, if you just say that for kicks and giggles, that 20% of your staff gets stuck a day, and the duration of a phone call is 15 minutes, and it's 2 engineers at an average labor rate of X, you can see the scaling costs that start to become out of control. And we did a cost breakdown of 500 engineers, 400, 300, 200, 100, and it's just wild. It gets exponentially worse. So can we get into this topic of, how do we make technology adoption easier? How do we eliminate sort of this adversarial nature between the front line and technology, what feels like adversarial relationship?
No, that's great. And, you're double dipping when you have phone a friend, right? So you're double dipping on cost at the same time. And, we experience that as well. And we're trying, so you have to get into some of the underlying activities associated with that. Well, why are they doing that?
Sure.
There is a why. We have to really kind of get into that aspect of it. And I think, a lot of times we kind of, it's like two ships passing in the night. Our IT teams aren't really engaged in the real experience that happens in the field, or vice versa, right? So our field teams don't really understand the capability. And that's why, I get into the comment around technology is not pixie dust, and we also have to be willing to change our processes. So it's a full contact sport, and collaboration is definitely needed to make some of these changes critically in the culture. And I do feel, the concept around knowledge-centered services and knowledge management is an important one. And I think in services in general, the guy who knows, the gal who knows everything is the subject matter expert. They want and love to be the subject matter expert, the go-to person. It's not always the most efficient way to do it. And I think we have to find different ways to incent and motivate our culture and reward people for knowledge sharing and not knowledge hoarding. So how do you share that information so that it can become widely used and benefit the company in a much broader fashion, rather than getting into the phone a friend type of activity? But you have to invest the time to go see where that is occurring and how it's occurring, and then from there you can start to understand how you can affect the change.
Absolutely.
But putting again, that allows you, if you're into knowledge sharing, and you have your continuous improvement loops around those outcomes that are being delivered around resolution processes and things like that, you really start to, you get more efficient, you get leaner, you reduce variation in process. When you reduce variation in process, obviously you drive a better customer experience. You can see outliers and detect quality issues much faster. I mean, there's tremendous amounts of benefit around, getting a much more process-centric capability and utilizing the tools that you have versus kind of doing things one off. And so when we have people that are doing things on sticky notes or on SharePoints that aren't managed or governed, that's another example of kind of phone a friend, right? I'm not really looking at the content, where it's
Yeah.
created, how it's used, and how effective and efficient it is.
Yeah. Great points. Let's kind of shift this into, the more strategic mindset of like building the business case for doing all the things that we're talking about, right? We talked about AI investments. We talked about a broader data strategy. We talked about reorging and re-architecting the organization in terms of people, process, and function. Um, how do you build a business case? What are some of the inclusions when you're building a business case and having that strategic dialogue at the C-suite?
Well, I think it comes around a couple of key critical things. Again, I'll go back to what you have to understand your customer journey. Number one,
Yeah.
part of that's the employee journey,
Yep.
and I think you have to look at it with the lens of anything that is manual or not automated is a source of evil and frustration somewhere in the
Sure.
world you want to eliminate. And so I think you have to really kind of start with that customer and employee journey. I
Yep.
think the next thing you have to do is with somewhat of a critical eye is to understand, uh, as an example, why are your customers engaging with you? How are they engaging with you? Where are they
Right.
engaging with you?
Right.
And then you have to kind of ask a kind of a rhetorical question of, does that make sense? I think in most, if you think about this from a consumer mindset, everybody wants to say, make it like Google or make it like Amazon. Um, we don't want to pick up the phone and have to call somebody to get to an answer. I just want to be able to Google it, find it, and do it.
Absolutely.
Um, so I think if you sit back and you do that from that particular lens, what you'll find out is there are things like, why isn't that on the web? Why isn't that automated? How much money is that costing me, or how much friction are you putting into the process, which has an impact on your NPS or your competitive positioning?
Yeah.
So, in a call center, as an example, there are, some benchmark surveys out there that would say 30% of your contact center volume is customers calling in and asking how to set up, what's the status of my contract? What's the status of my delivery? What's the status of my dispatch, my engineer, et cetera? All of those things should be just available, right? Nobody
Absolutely.
wants to call and find that
Absolutely.
information.
Absolutely. You just hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. And there's a parallel, another parallel between customers and employees, which is this orientation towards an effort methodology, right? If we make
Mhm.
it, if
Yeah.
we make it real, if it's full of friction and it's inaccessible, then the effort just goes through the roof for both customers and employees to figure out and resolve, right? And so the more we can make things more accessible, I completely agree with that notion.
So
Let's get, yeah,
let me
please.
one more quick
Yeah,
example. Think of it from this perspective, and I hear this example a lot. Like,
yeah,
I get on a company's website, and of course now that I have bots, right? There are people, and I
yep,
get into the bot. The bot can't solve my problem, so I get passed over to a live agent. And what do I end up doing? I end up repeating myself. Or if I get passed over into the phone queue, I end up repeating myself. Those are great examples of where we've taken data and we've optimized them in a silo, and we've not thought about the connectivity between those things. And
yep.
that's, I think, where the evolution of thinking has to occur, and the application of data science and automation needs to really get focused on.
It's extremely frustrating, even in a consumer-centric set of industries, when I encounter this whole process of going through a decision tree, identifying myself, giving every security pin I have ever created, double authentication, and then I get a live agent on the phone and they say, "Can you repeat all the above?" So I completely agree. And look, if they have to do that for compliance and all the things that are required, maybe there's a human touch that can be said. Listen, I know you just went through this, empathy, right? I know
Yes,
you just
correct.
went through this. Can we
Right.
go through it once more? It's compliance.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's get back to so some of the more strategic topics in terms of how do you define success within your service business? And I reference back to a recent research effort we did on KPIs and metrics, and one of the things that was revealed from the data, we look in each class of and category of metrics. So we look at employee, customer, cost, revenue, supply chain. So we were able to sort of aggregate what are the top three metrics in each class. But across all of those classes, service leaders are tracking and tracing on average 17 critical KPIs. Seems like a lot. However, when we isolate those that are achieving best in class performance in those critical metrics,
Mhm.
it's actually more. It's 27. And there's a couple of other commonalities that there's the presence of an executive management team member overseeing service. There's some other sort of foundational elements that call to light what are the commonalities amongst best in class. I'm curious, Bit, how do you look at success? What metrics are you go to? Do you have a top three that you just are constantly plugged into? Tell me a little bit about metrics in your perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't heard the 17 and 27 number before, so I don't feel so bad. I think when you look at I think if you were to look at it by function, and then if you were to add up the individual functions, you'd probably end up with more than 27, right? So a
Yep.
call center has their metrics, a field engineer has it, the logistics, et cetera. They probably all have 27, which means you end up with over 100 at the end of the day.
Yep.
Um, you know, I'm probably, I try to look at the business from our perspective in basically two different views. I look at the support side and I look at the project side.
Hmm.
And we have, a series of things that we're looking at in the project side. We look at things like a perfect order index. We're
Hmm.
looking at market cycle time, which talks to me about how fast am I turning an order. I'm looking at the profitability of the order. And those are kind of top tier one metrics for us. And then we get into, well, at a project management level, what are the other things that need to happen within the ability to go deliver some of those things? So I would say we probably look at like a tier one, a tier two, and in some cases a tier three metric that is more relevant to say a frontline executor. In the contact centers, it's I want to understand how much am I moving, how much volume am I moving to the left,
Yep.
how many repeats that I have, how many, obviously those are things around first time fix and first time resolution. I want to understand time to resolve or critical issues. But I think you start to get into some of the supporting metrics that get into the 5 whys. I think that's where you end up with, multiple trees of what metrics or what, key points of interaction are or inflection points are that you have to measure to really get to some of the, the root causes and corrective actions.
Oh, that was fascinating. I love going into that sort of set of metrics that you look at. Some interesting ones that you highlight there. So thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you for being so open and sharing of
Yeah.
some of the things you're looking at. Let's look at so learning moments. You've gone through change, many changes over the course of your career. You've led them. What are some of the learning moments, pitfall avoidance scenarios, and then secondarily to that, what are some of the success moments and or future things that you're looking at? So kind of a two-part question. What are the learning moments, pitfall avoidance scenarios, and then what's next for the organization in terms of success?
Yeah, I can. One of the probably the key learning moments for me, I can remember in one of the jobs I had before when I joined Philips, I was really working with basically contacts and dispatches in the call centers, and forward and reverse logistics and getting costs out of the system. And we were doing, I don't know, several million of contacts and dispatches on an annualized basis. And then I was asked to go run the online support infrastructure because we
Hmm.
needed some change there. And I was like, wow, they really don't really contribute that much to, the savings around, field engineering and logistics and things like that. But I really went into it with a completely blind point of view. We had over 300 million interactions on an annualized basis with our customers. And so there are perceptions, I think, that when we get into a silo,
Yeah.
that this is the most important piece, or you don't understand the extended maybe customer journey or the customer interaction or the employee journey, et cetera. And that was really kind of a telltale moment for me, is like, oh my gosh, now you're on the website, you've got 300 million visitors a year. What are you doing with that? That's massive compared to 10, 20 million calls coming into a call center.
Right.
Um, so I think you have to be open to new experiences and different ways of thinking, and understand. And when you do that, you have, me now from a services point of view, how am I turning that around? Well, I need to know when I'm approaching a product software engineer or a product developer or somebody that's driving, healthcare innovation from a clinician perspective. I have to, like, how can I walk a mile in their shoes to get their perspective of what's important to them and why is it important, and bringing those two worlds together to figure out how we can collaborate, but through speaking of a common language and some common outcomes. And again, that's why I go back to, there's always three ways we can talk to each other, is around cost, revenue, and NPS.
Yeah.
So if I can bring the conversation back to those things, and we can find out what's in it for me and what's in it for you, I think there's, opportunities for us to always make progress. And sometimes it's a compromise, and sometimes it's full on in one direction or full on in the other direction. But I think you have to be willing to be really open to those types of experiences.
I love it. I love it. Can you frame something that like is on the horizon for Philips? Like what's next? Anything sort of out there that might be a little bit more progressive in approach that has been
Yeah.
brought to light and something that the team's focused on?
Yeah, I mean, we're really, from a Philips point of view, the company, and we're focused on four things. Number one is the patient experience. The second thing is really around improving population health. Third is reducing the cost of care. And the last one is improving the healthcare worker experience. And so we want to do that by bringing technical innovation to life and in the healthcare space. I mentioned that we're trying to do that by impacting 2.5 billion lives over the course of the next 10 years. And
Yeah.
as the state of healthcare and healthcare needs change, we want to be at the forefront for our customers and especially with our patients. So access to care, connectivity within that healthcare continuum is really where we want to be focused. And obviously, digital data, creating some of those closed loop feedback opportunities where that is the focus of those outcomes is really where we're headed.
Outstanding. I talked a little bit about how humbled we are to have you as a board member. It's been a great relationship here in the early goings, and thank you for enlightening our community today. And for those that are listening, Bit is going to be delivering a keynote at our 2024 Smarter Services Executive Symposium. We've just kind of framed that out together in our planning strategy here prior to this podcast. So really excited to deepen the discussion as we get to the symposium, and he'll be joined by a colleague perhaps on main stage. So really excited about that. What has this been for you, Bit, the advisory board? What do you expect to get out of this, and how valuable has this been for you in terms of helping to frame some of your viewpoints on things?
I really think it's access to innovation and different ways of working, different approaches to common business challenges. I think from a services point of view, we're all faced with some of the same challenges day in and day out,
Yeah,
and we have different ways of solving them. Some work better for others than not, but it is those perspectives and looking at things through different lenses and different approaches, and the connections that you make within the industry that I think are really special.
outstanding. Listen, let's leave our listening audience here and participating audience with something about yourself personally. Maybe something you're looking forward to, or maybe something about yourself personally that's important and something you're passionate about.
Yeah, well, I have five boys, and I have three of them are actually very engaged in sports. I have one that's playing professional minor league baseball. So in the spring, which we're getting ready to approach here, very focused on getting to watch some minor league baseball. In the fall, I've got one that is training for the NFL draft, and one that's a Division One defensive coordinator at Sam Houston State. So we spend a lot of time doing football in the fall, and then in the middle, my wife and I, since we don't have any kids at home, spend a lot of time on the lake with our wake surfing boat. So those are kind of the three passions I have.
That's outstanding. Geesh, what a testament to the DNA there. I mean, all your kids are so successful, and kudos to you and your wife. God bless your wife for five
Yeah,
boys. My
exactly.
goodness, that's a amen. And then secondly, getting to know you a bit. You were a first lieutenant in the Army, and appreciate your service. That service is way more important than what we talk about every day. So I just wanted to thank you for your service to the country, and this has been a great discussion. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to deepening it at the symposium as we
You bet.
get closer to the fall. So thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right. To our listening audience, today's session is accessible at our website or whatever channel you subscribe to. I hope you enjoyed it. And join us in Chicago, September 9th through the 11th. We'll be joined by Bit and his colleagues, where we'll deepen the conversation. So thank you for joining today. We'll see you on the next one.